on a couple of slides so that we get some real-time input.
Sounds good. I think it's pretty hard to throw Jenny off, so I don't imagine she'll mind.
I know she's prepared. So are we waiting for Sean, or is he already on?
I don't see Sean yet. And I also don't see JJ quite yet. So maybe we'll give it just a couple more minutes.
Well, Siri's not saying 1:30 yet, so.
Oh, there you go. And she's the boss.
She is.
1:29.
Well, the list is growing. Sean's on. Great. Come on. Okay. And JJ's on. Okay. Well, I will let the clock strike. There we go, 1:30. Okay. I will call to order the November 16th Innovation Workgroup meeting held by Teams. And our first order of business is to take roll call, I guess. Yeah, so you've got the list there on the side.
Yeah, absolutely. So this afternoon we have joining us from PEBB, both Kimberly Hendricks and Sean Parkman are in attendance. And then from the OEBB board, we have Jeff Brown, Tom Siltabo, JJ Schofield, Bill Gropp, and I believe, Jeff, you had mentioned that there would be one additional member from the OEBB board planning to join us at 2 o'clock.
Yes, our current chair, Robert Young.
Great.
And the reason that both Bill and Robert, Bill's on now, Robert's going to join, is that they are members of our CIAL group committee, and we thought that it would be very helpful to have them listen in to the Centers of Excellence discussion, so we don't have to just repeat the same thing, because obviously the OEBB board's going to have to deal with it. So it was using the opportunity of this meeting to help bring Bill and Robert along.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to note, we did also let the PEBB board know that this conversation was happening at the meeting, and that if any of the board members had the time in their schedule and wanted to hop on and listen into some of the discussion, they were welcome to do so. So there is a chance that we may see some additional PEBB board members later in the afternoon, not for certain, however.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and approve the meeting synopsis for our last meeting. Or are there any comments before we move to approve? Are we good? I'll take a motion.
So moved.
And second.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Good, that carries. Our first order of business, or our first presentation, whatever, is the work plan update. So Margaret, I think this comes back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I will be referring to attachment 2 in your materials packet for today. And it's presented on the screen. I hope folks can see it. It's a little bit small, but hopefully large enough for everyone to make out the text. This is what we're referring to as our current draft of the Innovation Workgroup's work plan for the upcoming roughly 6-month period. Historically, we have tried to aim for about a 6-month work plan that we keep on a rolling basis in terms of planning out the particular projects and work that are going to be coming before the work group. I'll preface this by saying that this work plan is still very much a work in progress, especially as we get into first quarter of 2022 and kind of past the midwinter mark. But just starting out at the top for the November meeting, which is today, we do have some updates to the work group's charter that we are going to go over. It has been about 3 years since the work group began meeting, and so it's kind of a timely point in time to take a look at the charter and make some updates to keep that current. So we'll be sharing those with the work group for discussion and request for approval. Subsequent to that, the main topic for today is the Centers of Excellence program discussion, and that'll include preliminary review of the carrier proposals and time for work group discussion of program design, network, incentives, the various components of the COE program that are still in process. For the December meeting, we anticipate we'll be continuing the Centers of Excellence discussion. In addition to that, we will be reviewing the findings from the first year audit of the hospital CAP. That particular audit work is a traditional financial audit looking to ensure that carrier payments to individual hospitals in aggregate did not exceed the 200% of Medicare upper payment limit. So that audit has been ongoing, and we expect to have the final results at next month's meeting. Additionally, at next month's meeting, we'll continue some of the discussion we had over the past couple of months related to behavioral health. We began those discussions really looking at network adequacy and have referenced some of the other work going on concurrently within the state around implementation of reporting requirements under House Bill 3046, which is going to be happening in early 2022. As well as OHA is newly standing up a behavioral health metrics work group. So we're going to be following the work of that group as well and kind of determining how we can be a stakeholder in that work. All of that said, as context, the specific discussion we'll have at the December meeting will be really around very preliminary recommendations our consultants have related to carrier reporting and contract standards that PEBB or OEBB may want to consider moving forward. I anticipate that'll be a preliminary discussion at next month's meeting. The work group won't necessarily be making any specific decisions, but we'll be having initial review of those recommendations and some initial discussion. For the January meeting, we have actually determined we will be having no meeting in the month of January. We'll be taking a hiatus for the work group as we do some additional work planning. January tends to be when we are also in the early phases of plan renewals for PEBB and OEBB. So there's just a lot of work going on, and it seems like appropriate timing for the work group to take a brief pause while we continue to get work planned and prepared. Looking forward to February, and I highlight February and March because we may kind of flip-flop some of the timing on this. For those 2 months, we have further work on the behavioral health topics planned, as well as a status look at where we are with value-based payments. That is something that's been on the work group's work plan, and we had hoped to get to it this fall. It looks like it will be, a winter topic for the work group. That'll include both looking at VBP reporting that OHA has developed, an update on the cost growth target program, as well as the value-based payment work group. And then we'll seek some updates from our carriers on the status of their value-based payment efforts and their expansion strategy. Additionally, Mercer is in the process of doing some work looking at a gap analysis of carrier VBP approaches, so we'll have some information from that as well. So quite a full list of topics that feed into that overall arena of value-based payments. Beyond March, we get into Q2, and as you can see on the agenda, or on the document, there are several topics highlighted that need to be fleshed out a little more fully. One of them, of course, which will be ongoing, is related to the Centers of Excellence program development, and the exact timing and occurrence of COE program work in terms of future phases will really depend a lot on some of the conversation the work group has in the next couple of months, and any recommendations the work group makes to the board as sort of initial phase 1 recommendations, which we're targeting for the boards for this winter. So I'm happy to take any questions. And I do anticipate that in the coming months, we're definitely going to be fleshing this out a little more specifically, so that as we look through the first half of 2022, we have kind of a more concrete lay of the land in terms of the topics we'll be tackling each month.
Are we planning on continuing the third Tuesday afternoon of the month?
Yes. As of this point, that meeting time is sort of set for when the innovation work group meets. If there were concerns or proposals to potentially reconsider that, I think we would entertain.
I'm just trying to fill in my calendar.
Okay. Well, so third Tuesday afternoon, we have no plans to change that unless a compelling need were to arise, and then we would certainly
sure.
work with that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Let's move on then to the charter update.
Right, thank you. All right, so the next topic for today's agenda, the charter updates. This is attachment 3 in today's materials packet. And so this is the charter that the work group adopted in October of 2018. As I mentioned, it's been about 3 years since this work was done, so it seems sort of timely to take a look at the charter and make sure that it is consistent with how the work group operates and meets the needs of this group in terms of how business is conducted. The first edits that have been proposed are on page 2. Rose, if you could advance a page. Thank you. And so the first main area where we're recommending some edits is in the guiding principles section. And many of these guiding principles are the ones that were already adopted back in 2018. They've just sort of been rearranged. And in particular, what we did was we grouped them into specific areas of quality, access and equity, sustainable cost, and partnership. And so you can see the principles are sort of structured in that way. The specific guiding principles around quality are new. The two that you see under the quality heading have been added to the 2018 version of the charter. Also within access and equity, we've added that first bullet point to spell out a little bit more specifically about the what we mean by equity and prioritized populations. And then when you look at the section on sustainable cost, we included the last bullet around expansion and the use of value-based payment approaches. That is not something that was specifically called out in the original charter, and so we do recommend incorporating that. Aside from those specifically called out additions, all of these other bullet points under the guiding principles are the ones that the work group originally adopted in 2018. They've just, as I mentioned, sort of been reshuffled to put them sort of in those 4 major categories. And then Rose, if you could advance to page 3. The other major area of the charter where we're recommending some updates is around membership roles and responsibility. And specifically, the original charter indicated that the the boards would each appoint 2 voting members to the work group. We are recommending an update to indicate that the boards shall each appoint a minimum of 2 voting members to the work group with the option to appoint additional voting members. And that the members of the work group shall designate a chair and vice chair on an annual basis during the first quarter of the calendar year. And specifically, what's new about this is that we're recommending that the charter be modified to include some language that allows more than 2 voting members from each PEB and OEB. And we're specifying that designation of the chair and vice chair will occur during the first quarter of the calendar year. Previously, we didn't have that timing specified, and we would sometimes get off track in terms of how staying current with following that. So as you'll see kind of beneath that, the additional changes really sort of mirror under the members section what we're recommending in terms of the option to appoint more than 2 members. Additionally, under non-voting members, we're recommending the charter be revised to indicate 1 member of the House, 1 member of the Oregon Senate, and then additional non-voting members with workgroup consensus. And previously, as you can see, the strike-through language, we had more non-voting members from the legislature as representation on this workgroup. And so we're just recommending an update to specify the 2. Are there any questions about any of that?
Yeah, this is Tom. I've been on the IWG now for a little less than a year, I think, and I haven't seen any participation from anybody from the legislature. I see their names as members, but do they actually participate? Has there been any participation over the last year or 2?
You know, I will say, so historically going back, we did have pretty active participation. I think that with the onset of the pandemic, there was a lot of disruption and a lot of demands that sort of placed, demands on everyone's schedule. We do, Representative Nose is a non-voting advisory member of the work group. And we do, Ali can speak to this, confer with him pretty regularly, and he's pretty engaged on the work the work group is doing. He's just not always able to attend meetings.
Yeah, he checks in every other month, Rep. Nose does, and he keeps track of what's going on. There's really a legislative session, and then like today is legislative days. So it's just kind of been a conflicting schedule. The other one, not much. So
okay, just a question. I mean, it's great to have members, but if they don't participate, it's pretty meaningless. But
yeah,
okay,
yeah, no, thank you for the question. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And Rose, if you could move forward to page 4, there's just a couple of other changes I want to call out that we are recommending. And this is in the deliverables and outputs section. We are recommending annual reports presented to the legislature be updated to biennial report to the legislature. That is generally what we do in our biennial PEBB OEB update to the legislature. We include a report on what the innovation work group has been up to. And then rather than develop a 3-year strategic plan, we are recommending develop and maintain a strategic work plan that aligns with the board's priorities. And these changes just kind of reflect what what this work group is really already doing. So it's more about sort of updating our deliverables and outputs to reflect how the work group functions. Are there any questions about the proposed language changes?
Okay.
All right. All right. Well, hearing none, this request from staff is for work group consensus to adopt the charter changes.
So do we pass this on current voting members? Clarification.
You know, I suppose so. I guess I would recommend, yeah. So certainly, so
Yes.
current voting members would make the determination on this, and then once this has been decided, then the work group would have the purview of updating the voting membership per the changes in the charter.
Okay.
I move we adopt.
First. And was that you, Sean?
Yep. Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Adopted. Okay.
Right. Thank you. And now if you'd like to formally welcome any additional voting members, you may do so.
Well, let me be the first to welcome you all. I think we will take this up at our respective board meetings to see if there are any others that wish to become members. But at this point, Tom, you're the only one that's joining us on a voting capacity.
I haven't voted, but and what I've seen is all the decisions have been done on a consensus basis. So voting versus not voting isn't an issue. If you'd like me to cast a vote, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Well, on those issues going forward, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And Kimberly, you're a member currently, are you not?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, so Kimberly came from the PEBB board, assuming Dana Harganani's seat as her role changed. So yeah, so Sean and Kimberly are the two voting members from PEBB.
My understanding is that Kimberly's been a voting member for the last couple meetings.
Yeah.
So.
Right, but I wasn't here, so I was worried to say anything. Okay.
Oh, that's no problem. I felt your presence no matter what. Okay. Well, I'm pleased to have the COE report presented by Willis Towers Watson. And the reason that I'm pleased is this committee has taken on two really difficult projects, that in behavioral health and centers of excellence. And they both have different attributes than I think we've really tackled in the past based on the number of entities that are involved and how we solve these problems. Obviously, the distraction of COVID and all that brings, and other issues that are before us. So on an interim basis, I think we're making good progress, and I just encourage all of you to be patient as we slug through this. And I think there's a promise of good things to come in the future. So nobody planned for me to make those comments, but Jenny, go ahead and take it.
Jeff, just a quick question about how you want us to proceed. Do you want us to be asking questions during it, or do you want us to hold off until the presentation is over?
I defer to Jenny with the exception of two places that I declared at the beginning of the meeting where I'm going to ask carriers to comment. Okay. Jenny, what's your...
Yeah, I think it's helpful to take questions as you have them, Dr. Siltabo, because, well, I mean, it's on everyone. It's going to be on everyone's mind, so I think that'll be helpful.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for asking, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Jeff, for that introduction. That's really helpful. Yes, I would agree that a topic like centers of excellence, especially given what we're attempting to do with OEBB and PEBB, you know, it's a really complex topic with, I think, some potential for some great outcomes, but certainly it's not an easy thing to tackle. If it was easy, everyone would have tackled it by now, right? And we all would have, we would all be moving on, and this would be sort of the low-hanging fruit. But this is more like that second tier level of effort, especially when we talk about customizing it like we're going to do. So I'll just go ahead and get started. I do have with me two colleagues that I just want to make sure that we know are on Teams, I guess. who may be interjecting throughout and doing some of the presenting as well. The first is Dr. Patricia Torro. Dr. Torro is one of our consulting physicians who has been working with us on this project for, several months now. Dr. Torro is the consulting physician that we work with on the OEBB side. For many of you in the Innovation Work Group, you may remember, it's been a while, that we had Dr. Lewis Dickey helping us with this project, in the early part of the year and in previous years. Dr. Dickey has retired from WTW. So Dr. Torro is filling in, but she's been super helpful as we've been talking with carriers in crafting things like the quality metrics. So she's going to cover a lot of the quality metrics today. And then the second person that we have is Jesse Knight, and Jesse is a consultant out of our Seattle office. And we asked Jesse to help us kind of with this later phases of reviewing the carrier solutions and kind of digging into some of those details. Jesse's done some work with Centers of Excellence on his own clients and has been with WTW for a while, and so thought he would add some really helpful context, especially when we ask about how other employers are implementing these. And Jesse is going to sort of talk about the steerage options at the end. Hopefully we'll get to those. Okay, so I think, and then, Margaret has been with us throughout this whole journey and has been pretty integral too. And so, I don't know, Margaret, you may have a few interjections as we go along as well. All right, let's go ahead and look at the agenda. All right, so part of our discussion today is we're gonna take a couple of steps back and do some review, because we haven't really talked in detail about our Center of Excellence program or strategy or efforts since last spring, and that's been a while. Though the carriers and Margaret and I have been, working on it pretty steadily since that time. Thought it would be good to just review, like, why did we agree that this would be a good thing to do? What were the things that contributed to that decision? And, what makes for a good Center of Excellence? And then we'll kind of dive into what the carrier responses are and some of our next steps. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next. We went ahead and put an executive summary together. Just really, if the way I think about these is that if I could boil this entire presentation down into 5 statements, here's what they are. Obviously, we're going to dive into quite a bit more detail on each of these, but at a high level, the Innovation Work Group asked this group, the carriers, Willis Towers Watson, and the Innovation Work Group staff to work together to develop the Center of Excellence program for musculoskeletal procedures. And we're going to talk more about that. Since May, we've been working with the carriers to develop some what I would call sort of rules of the road. So let's all we got all together on, what are we trying to accomplish with this so that everyone's on the same page. When we think about quality, which is sort of the primary pillar of this program, what does quality mean and how do we measure that? And is there a way that we can talk about metrics so that we're all thinking about quality in the same way? We're going to dive into a lot of detail about that today. And then let's talk about a timeline. Like, if we want to get this implemented for the upcoming plan years, what does it look like and what do we need to do? So then the next phase was the collection and evaluation of those quality metrics that we all agreed on. That has been happening, although the comment here is that the focused time of collecting this quality data was right in the middle of the peak of the pandemic. And so some of the provider community asked for some additional time to really understand what was going on. And, it's a fair lift to get the quality data in. So that's been delaying our timeline a bit. And then we'll go through when we did formally ask the carriers to provide, like, What are you proposing for OEB and PEB in the upcoming year based on what we've talked about in terms of quality and a network and the support systems that you carriers need to provide in order to make sure the program is successful? So we'll review those responses. And then at the end of the day, you know, we did get responses from all the carriers. They're not 100% fully baked. And that's because this is a complex project. So given where we are today, and we'll go through these options, we're recommending a more incremental approach to still get us to the goal, but it just might take us a little bit longer until we're at what we'd like to call ideal. So that's where we are today. Okay, that's our executive summary. So I think we can go ahead and dive into a little bit of background. Okay, back in February of this year, that's really kind of the culmination of a lot of the work that we did to look at the cost drivers within OEB and PEB, and really came to the conclusion that it would be great to develop a customized Oregon-focused Center of Excellence strategy. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So the Center of Excellence would focus on select musculoskeletal procedures. And throughout this presentation, we're going to talk about hip and knee replacements, or sometimes we'll call that total joint replacements, and then back, spine, and neck procedures. And for the most part, we're talking about sort of uncomplicated procedures that are often preference sensitive, or in some cases, there's multiple methods of addressing the pain that the person is in, and surgery is one of those, and we'll talk more about that. The goal was to use some aligned metrics, as I mentioned, to make sure we're all talking the same language in terms of quality. And then again, we have the preferred timeline for implementation of this next upcoming plan year. The goals of the program, number one, is focused on quality. So steerage to these high quality physicians and surgeons. And what does that mean? Again, we're going to talk about this, but fewer complications, fewer readmissions, and fewer infections. And it includes some other things, but that's the primary thing. What that should lead to is peace of mind for OEB members and improved outcomes for those members, which should also lead to lower costs or more efficient costs for those particular procedures. A key tenet of a Center of Excellence strategy is making sure that carriers, in this case, identify members early who might be eligible for this type of a program. So when we think about that, it's really kind of too late if the member is already talking with the surgeon and having a discussion about surgery, because at that point you're sort of trying to retrain them to do something else. Really important to get in front of members early when they're just starting to have pain symptoms, and give them a concierge type solution to help them navigate the healthcare system, to use conservative therapies first, effective physical therapy when appropriate, and then if at the end of the day surgery is appropriate, we get them to the highest quality places that are the most efficient. The last item on this goal is consistency of reimbursement, and we've been talking a lot about bundled payments and warranties as being the ideal, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that those are forms of value-based payment arrangements, and have Medicare has seen some really nice results from that, and so ideally that's what we would want to see too. But at the end of the day, it's all about getting consistency of reimbursement and honestly getting the best deal, whatever that may be, right? Okay, so that's the background. The next page we're going to talk about, just remind the group, what are some of the things that we looked at over the prior year to help us get to this decision to do this? So some of this will look familiar to those of you who've been on the group for a little while. MSK, which stands for musculoskeletal, is a top spend category for OEB and PEB. So when we did this cost driver analysis 2 years ago, maybe it's 3, we uncovered that, these joint replacements and back and spine procedures were representing a pretty significant area of spend, and that spend is impactable. So at our most recent look at these procedures represent about $63 million of spend for OEB and PEB combined. That represents about 4% of healthcare spending, and it's pretty similar between the two. PEB has a few more of the back spine surgeries, and OEB tends to have more of the total joint replacements. But all in all, it's a high area of spend, or a significant amount of spend that's impactable. It does represent, in the most recent year that we looked at, 1,400 procedures. So 1,400 members are getting each and every year. When we looked at this 2-3 years ago, it was 1,200 procedures. So we have more today, and that's even during the pandemic time. So during the pandemic time, at least for OEB, we saw a dip, of course, during March, April, May, of those procedures just not being done at all. But by the end of 2020, we had pretty much gotten back to more than a typical year in terms of knee and hip replacements. So this is an area of frequent spend and frequent utilization for both plans going forward. Variation in quality. I'll go to that tile next. So one of the things we looked at in our work is that obviously when you have all these procedures happening, they're happening at different facilities, they're happening with different surgeons. There are some quality data available that we pulled, and again, we're going to get into a whole discussion about how to measure quality in a couple of minutes. But what we saw is some variation in quality scores for those hospitals. And, you know, we've got some statistics here about how many of these procedures were performed in the sort of the top quartile, which sort of means that some of these were performed at the bottom quartile. What we'll talk about more in terms of quality is you really have to dig deeper than the facility and start looking at the individual surgeon's results to help you get a full picture. But anyway, there is variation in quality. And then I'll go up to that top right tile, which leads to variable outcomes from surgery, right? So, or it tends to lead to variable outcomes from surgery. And we saw that in OEB and in some of the OEB and PEB data that we looked at. So as I kind of mentioned, one of the features of a center of excellence is trying to get members aware early of their options and to try the conservative therapy first. There have been studies to show that about almost a third of these procedures could be managed by other types of therapy, and they measured the outcome after a certain period of time, and folks tended to have the same outcome in many instances, whether they went the surgery route or the physical therapy route. So what that just means is that there's some opportunity, we believe, to improve outcomes. At the end of the day, most members don't really want to have surgery, right? They just don't want to be in pain anymore, and they want to get back to their regular way of living. And sometimes it feels like the only way is surgery, but it's we've definitely seen some success with other employers when we can kind of give those members options at the beginning and really help them and be side by side with them as they're going along that journey. Complications. So another reason that we decided to look at this is we dug into, hey, what's the complication rate that we saw within the OEB and PEB procedures? Turns out that our complication rate was about 3 to 5%, which is pretty typical for many employer plans that we see. However, what we found through our vendor RFI that we did with COE vendors that specialize in this work, contracting with centers of excellence, is that the best in class goal is less than 1%. It's about 0.5%. And many of the center of excellence vendors will guarantee that complication rate because they know that they're selecting higher quality physicians who are also committed to that same goal. And then we have the tile down on the right about variation in cost. You know, we did this work a little while ago about looking at the different cost of these surgeries. And we did we took out the complicated surgeries and just looked at sort of the typical ones. The cost will vary sometimes based on where it's performed, because inpatient is more expensive than outpatient. Ambulatory surgery center is even more efficient. So that can vary. That work was done before the hospital reimbursement cap. And as we have been learning about the hospital reimbursement cap, that will reduce some variation, but doesn't always drive the lowest or most efficient cost. So definitely something to look at there. And then finally, I kind of referred to this study that we did about a year ago, where we did an actual formal request for information from traditional COE vendors in the space, plus OEBB and PEBS carriers. And so those are vendors like Surgery Plus, Bridge Health, Signify, and some others. And what we found there is that they had some great feedback, but the approaches were all varied. Everyone was using a little bit of a different approach to how they selected the facilities or surgeons in their network, how they monitored them. Sometimes the inclusion criteria was mainly, are they going to agree to our bundled payment? And there wasn't as much focus on quality. And other times it was very focused on the physician quality and not so much the surgeon quality. And then finally, the other big thing is that many of these COE vendors have a sort of an already curated network that didn't include too many facilities in Oregon. And their main method of getting folks to that is to provide a robust travel benefit so that they're traveling, around to those centers of excellence, which is fine. But I think when we were talking with the innovation work group, I think there was some interest in using this as a way to transform healthcare in Oregon, right? So we want to support the Oregon providers and the provider communities, but we really just want to push them to do their best, and we want to drive members to the best providers in Oregon, as long as they can meet the top quality metrics that we have. Okay, so I'll stop and take a breath. I don't know if anyone has any questions at this point.
This is Tom. The only thing I'm going to discuss, and probably not exactly the right time, but I want to just introduce the concept. We're talking about top surgeons or less than top surgeons. And I think it is an issue of around surgical teams. There's going to be we'll need to get into that to a greater degree. And hospitals will be different. In other words, there's hospitals that have open medical staffs where essentially anyone who has the board certification and training is given privileges to do things, as compared to, an example would be OHSU, where they select their orthopedic surgery staff and they assign who does what. So it's possible that in open medical staff environments, focusing on the outcome of individual surgeons may be appropriate. I think it's going to, but there's other environments where it's the outcome of that surgical team, which may be anywhere from 1 to 5, and even in then medical in hospitals that have open medical staffs, there's oftentimes one large orthopedic group that does the majority. And I'd be very interested in understanding, what the outcomes of the larger group is, because the more numbers that you have, the more validity you're going to have to the data. As there's less variation when you get greater number of cases. So we can talk about that to a greater degree when we get into that issue, but I think we're going to need to address that.
Tom, thank you for raising that. I mean, that's just further testifying that this is not an easy thing to nail down.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts, but we need to keep slugging away at it.
Absolutely.
Jenny.
Yes, totally agree. And I think those are all valid points. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more as we talk about the specific quality, the way we're looking at quality. And there's certainly, yeah, we'll get into that when we're talking about quality. Okay, let's go to the next page. So this is a page I thought would be helpful to share. This is, we've shared this a couple of times, and so we included this in our kickoff meeting with the carriers last May, where we talked about, okay, we all want to work on this together, but who's responsible for what? So essentially what you can see here is that the carriers at the end of the day are responsible for identifying the facility and surgeons for participation in the proposed network. They're responsible for monitoring that quality performance over time and reporting it. And then they're responsible for providing the decision support needed to help members make the best decision about which care path is best, and to do that early engagement of members and steerage to the conservative therapy. Typically, they would provide reporting and performance guarantees, and then they would also negotiate the preferred reimbursement method. What are we doing? The innovation work group staff and consultants. Well, what we're trying to do is to make sure everyone's using the same measuring stick as we go forward, as I mentioned before. So let's come to a common agreement on quality as much as we can. It's not always going to be black and white, but we want to try and get it pretty close. And then, we laid out that while it's while the carriers are going to select the network based on the quality metrics that we come up with, we're also going to compare that to some other third-party quality sources just to make sure we're having a good conversation. Doesn't mean that necessarily would preclude someone from being in the network, but just to make sure that we're taking another look at that. And we'll talk about even a third approach that we're working on. Health equity is an important topic for both boards, and so we definitely want to make sure we're asking questions about how the carriers are incorporating the reduction of health disparities in the design of this program. And then, of course, providing updates to OEBB and PEBB and making sure that we have alignment in the reimbursement method. And then for OEBB and PEBB, each of the individual boards at the end of the day would be expected to approve the recommendations that are established by the innovation work group. If we have a steerage approach that we're recommending, it might be different for each board. And so we'll talk about that at the end of this presentation. And then definitely, it's helpful, each of the boards always wants to understand what's the impact to our members, both good and negative, and we will definitely help to tease that out as we go through. Okay, let's move to the next page. This was the timeline that we came up with at the beginning of the project, just to let you know. Again, we had that kickoff meeting in May. In June and in the summer months, what we did is spent the time kind of establishing the volume criteria and how we would measure quality metrics. And there were a number of meetings that Margaret and our team had with the carriers to sort of talk about that, solicit input on how those quality metrics should be, changed or improved, or how they should be aligned. And then we worked with, Margaret really helped with this, to work with the all-payer, we'll get into this a little bit more, but the all-payer, all-claims database to help us take some initial cuts at the volume, which is how many procedures are done at a particular place. That helped inform, sort of the next step of who we want to start looking at in terms of quality. So once we kind of got the quality metrics and the volume metrics to a place where they were, something that we could send out to the facilities, the goal, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is to gather that quality information back from the facilities. The carriers would use that to inform their proposed networks, which were due at the end of October. And then here we are today, talking about this. Again, the goal at the beginning was to get this to make a final decision by the April timeframe of next year. We'll talk a little bit. We may need to revisit some of the aspects of this. Let's go to the next page. Okay, real quickly, this is probably familiar to many of you, but we laid out at the beginning, like, what do we want to achieve with this Center of Excellence? And I've talked about these many, so I'll just maybe real quickly, again, it's doing that pre-vet. The goal is to make sure we've done some pre-vetting of provider systems and surgeons and facilities to make sure that to give members a sense of confidence that the providers that we're steering them to really are good and that they have the best chance of optimal outcomes from those particular providers. That should lead to the higher satisfaction, and then on the other side of the equation, what's in it for OEBB and PEBB, again, identifying those high-performing surgeons and getting folks in early should lead to lower costs and more efficient care, and really should help provide a level of transparency about what's happening in terms of quality and cost over time. Okay, so let's start getting into the.
Can I ask a question? If we could go back one slide just for a second. So overall, this is great, and what I appreciate about this discussion and process is that we have put quality as the number one, and so I want to recognize that. That's correct. I also want to recognize that there is a number two, and the number two priority is cost. And it's not as important as number one, but it's still on the list, And so it feels to me that we would want to come to that sooner than later, like around step 2 here, when we're talking about quality and whatever. Because it's not just that the carriers are going out there and figuring out the facilities and evaluating their data based on quality, which they are, but also cost, which they also are. And that's the same, that feels like the same question, like when you ask one, you ask the other. Because we're after a specific slice of facilities, and setting aside for the moment the complexity that Tom eloquently put, it's it's the facilities, it's the people, it's the teams, however we're pinning that down, whatever. Point is, quality and costs, right? It's not just that we're trying to approve the top 25% quality people. It's that there is a group of people that are in the top 25 and they're in the bottom 25 on costs at the same time. That's the group. And so so I just wanted to bring that up and see what your thoughts are of like where that fits on this key design phase thing.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you're exactly right. I mean, we obviously want to focus on ensuring efficient cost. And there's a couple of different ways to go about that. I mean, one is that, the inclusion of ambulatory surgery centers should be pretty key to these networks because they are just more efficient, right? So if they're providing the same level of outcomes, of high outcomes as a more expensive facility, it just makes sense to if they're both equal, right, then you want to kind of move folks to the more efficient place in terms of cost to do it. And there's a couple of different ways to go about that, and we'll get to there when Jesse sort of talks about steerage. But one of them is, you can just tell people, hey, it costs this much when you go here, and it costs this much when you go over here. Which one do you, which one of them's going to cost you less? What do you think? And if we tell them they're the same quality, I feel like that helps them make a better decision. The other way is all the way at the other end of the spectrum is, well, we only will allow you to go to these places that are more efficient and have the same quality. It's just similar, but different message.
I mean, I hear what you're saying about steerage. My concern is about the demand we're putting on the facility. Like, if you want to be one of our centers of excellence, this is the price. And I already know what that price is because it was on slide 3.
Yeah.
You know, because like we already know what the price range is. And the answer is whatever the lowest price range is, that's the thing. And so once a facility gets wind of the fact that we're looking at them for a center of excellence, suddenly they're going to be like, oh, well, you know, we're excellent. So we're going to have to charge you extra. Sorry. You know, like that feels too late, right? So, I mean, it's the same discussion with the facility. Now, when it comes to steering people, that's a different thing. But when it comes to setting the bundled price, that feels like an upfront conversation that we would want to have decided upon when we go into negotiating the first, you know, not later, but like upfront.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me ask a question of the group, and that is, there's been some statements in the past that would suggest that access is more important than cost. Where are we as a group on our priorities?
Well, I don't want to speak for the entire board. I'm interested what, you know, Kimberly thinks as well. But I think we have talked about, as a board, willing to tolerate some loss of access with the understanding that there are travel benefits as part of the deal in order to capture higher quality.
Yep.
And better costs, and that's part of the deal. And I feel like that if we go to our board with that won't be the first time that they've ever heard those. Like, what? You know, that you know, we've broached that topic before, and it's a particular group of facility procedures. So it's not like everything. It's not like you can't get any health care in, you know, Eastern Oregon or whatever. And we are willing to pay your travel. And, you know, we have to talk about what the accommodations are for the follow-up stuff, you know, the physical therapy, and like how that's arranged with local providers. I mean, that's all kind of the bundle. But that's my sense from our board.
Okay. Any other comments?
My thoughts is, if you look at centers of excellence outside of what we're doing, the response is you get to fly to Cleveland if you want to have this procedure, or wherever, far away. And we recognize that would be less tenable with our members. So we are looking to create a structure where we're going to keep you in the state of Oregon. And personally, I'm okay with saying you may have to go a little bit far, and we're willing to give you a benefit. But I'm in favor of closer to thou shalt, you know, with some exceptions, than just trying to steer it with price. I think you just steer it with price, it's not going to work. I know that some years ago I had to have a tooth extraction. I lived in Waldport, Oregon, and I had Willamette Dental, which is one of our carriers, and they said, cool, you have to go, you don't have a choice. If you want this done, you have to go to Tigard. And I went, wow, that sucks, that's really far. Oh, well, I guess I'm going to Tigard. Or I don't have that procedure, and I needed the procedure, so I drove to Tigard. I didn't like driving to Tigard, but it wasn't a big deal. It's just part of the deal. You want Willamette Dental and it's cheaper than the other option, you get to drive to Tigard if you want to have your tooth extracted. So I think that should be our response. And I chose to live in Waldport, Oregon, where you don't have a local office.
So what you're raising, Sean, begs the question of plan design, which we haven't settled on. And I was going to suggest at the end of this report that be the next topic that we tackle in terms of how we would structure this. Because, well, there are experiences with incentives and how well they work, and there's experiences with This is where you will go. And I think we have to come to grips with that as a group, because in part it leads to further responses from the providers as well as the carriers. So we have to tackle it.
This is Tom. The other issue, and we've talked about in the past where cost follows quality. For surgical procedures, it oftentimes isn't the specific charge or base charge for the procedure. It's what happens. It's the complication rates that blow the cost, through the ceiling. So in most settings, it really has been shown that cost does follow quality. The concept of centers of excellence is based on, one, how common the procedure is. An example is if you're going to have a pediatric heart transplant, you're not going to get it in the state of Oregon because there aren't any programs that do pediatric heart transplants. You're going to Stanford or you're going somewhere else. But the procedures that we have picked are ones that are common enough that, one, doing something and doing it better, one will both improve the health of our membership and will decrease costs. So as JJ said, there are going to be significant number of options for our members in the state of Oregon. Is it going to be as open as it is now? By definition, not, because the idea is that there'll be people and facilities that qualify and those that don't. But the procedures we've chosen give us an opportunity with travel benefits to be able to direct people and still feel good about what we're doing. It's not draconian. It's not saying, and remember, these are procedures that people have once or maybe twice in their lifetime. It's not like going to their primary provider for a checkup. So I think that's the other thing that we should feel comfortable about.
Yeah, I also know that for me, cost is why we're doing this. It's an area of high spend, but the reality is what gets us the money is the quality. So with a hospital payment cap, 200%, the variability is much less than it used to be. So I'm less concerned about people just randomly overcharging us than I was a few years ago. But the quality is far more important. The worst thing to happen to an individual member is you have a procedure, that doesn't work and you got to go back. Or you have some sort of more serious health condition as a result of a botched procedure.
Yeah, and I guess I would say a lot of this depends on, what does the network look like, right? Because if we are going to be driving additional volume to select facilities, that does provide more leverage to get a better deal. Mm-hmm. But at this point, I feel like it's hard to say that with definity yet. I think because there still needs to be work on the network. Once we have a better sense of the network and it starts unfolding, I do think there's going to be more opportunity for the carriers to negotiate a deal. And again, it might take them steps to get to our ideal goal of what that might be for an inpatient, outpatient, and a ambulatory surgery event.
That makes sense. And last thing I'll say on this for the moment is just around price. And really what I'm talking about is negotiating with both the carriers and the networks. So I'm kind of talking to our consultants here about like strategies and so having like a firm idea in hand, what price we're thinking, bundled price, is one thing. Another thing that I just want to flag, because it has now happened, is that a lot of facilities out there have a budget and they have cost growth targets. And when they lose revenue from one area, they increase prices in another in order to make up for it. This is the so-called whack-a-mole problem that we often lament. And I just want to like flag it that we want to be sure that we're on top of our carriers, that they're not letting go of the reins, so to speak, on negotiating other areas while, you know, we get this put into place and some of the other contracts try to compensate for their loss of business, essentially, by increasing prices somewhere else, up to 200% or whatever it is. But just there are areas that they can increase prices. So, so I just want to flag that we want to be sure that we're pushing on our carriers so as to not drop the ball on that while we're trying to do one thing over here. We're not taking our eye off of other contracts over here, which has happened now. So just want to flag that.
Well, consider it flagged, and we will have an even more robust discussion on that downstream here. Jenny.
Okay, so Rose, let's go to slide 9. We're going to start talking a little bit about how different places measure quality in this for these particular procedures. So Dr. Torro, do you want to, now I see you there. Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and lead us through this discussion?
No, I'm happy to walk us through a few slides. As you rightly point out, quality is a key component of setting up these centers of excellence. And so we're just going to walk you through some of the considerations and some of the ways we might measure quality together. First thing to say is that there's not really a standard method for measuring quality across the marketplace. There are multiple ways we could do it, and there's certainly some key themes that Jenny mentioned earlier about infections, complications, readmissions. The insurers and carriers, they all have their own criteria, which they mainly use using claims data. Of course, the centers of excellence that are done through vendors will often use their own data, either claims that they receive or some consumer data, and they'll have their own proprietary criteria. And then if you look more broadly within the marketplace, there are some references that we potentially could use. There are 5 listed here. I'm not going to read all the details, but the bottom line is all of them except for the Quantros generally look primarily at facilities. Health Grades and US News does have some physician level data, but it's mostly from patient feedback. So it can be quite variable and skewed from time period to time period. Leapfrog has a big focus on safety, which is an important key component to quality overall. And US News focuses quite a bit on tertiary or quaternary, like the more complex facilities that can take more complex patients. And then the ProPublica data set used a lot of Medicare data, but it was published in 2015 and by definition, it was using previous data. So at this point in time, it's quite old. Next slide.
Well, so before you go to that page, sure. If we could go back.
Yep.
I'm curious if any of the carriers online can tell us which of these they're using or if they're using their own custom criteria.
Great. Jeff, want me to respond for Kaiser Permanente?
Yeah, thank you, Keith.
Yeah, so we use our own non-claims-based criteria in an effort to manage quality. We emphasize quality really at the program level as opposed to the surgeon level, though individual surgeons measured, we really believe that when a program is doing good work, selecting the right patients, preparing those patients for surgery when the teams are in place, and providing surgical team-based care when the non-surgical teams are in place, helping prepare patients, that's really how you get the best outcomes. We do submit data to Leapfrog. That's from national data, and our hospitals always do great with that. In some situations, we submit data to Quantros for total joint and spine care. The only thing Quantros is measuring is Medicare fee-for-service, so it's just really a tiny sliver of our business and doesn't accurately reflect the work, the quality going on in our programs. So we may have been, I think, do have ratings with US News and health grades, but really don't use those. That's really passive.
Okay. Thank you. Is anybody on the phone from Providence?
This is Dr. Popowich at Moda. I can speak up for us a little bit.
Okay.
And we've certainly been using the Quantros data, and even though it is just Medicare, it's been very useful. But we've also been using metrics of our own that we have supplied to several of the ASCs around the state of the metrics we would want to look for in a high quality facility. So that's primarily what we've been using so far.
Okay. How old are your metrics?
Well, our metrics are not that old because we haven't done too much in the center of excellence space. So we've come up with a lot of these metrics internally here on our own and what we're looking at.
But they're largely claims based, are they?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Great. So is there anybody from Providence on the line? Okay.
This is Stephanie Gregory from Providence. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Cash.
I was just going to say, I don't know the full answer to which version of the measures we use. I do know we use Leapfrog, but maybe Stephanie, you might have more details on what else we might use beyond Leapfrog.
Yeah, I don't. Sorry, I was going to just say that unfortunately our medical director could not make it today. So I think we need to circle back with her to get the full answer.
Okay,
well, yeah, I mean, we've had a couple of conversations with Providence, and I mean, at a high level, I'm definitely not going to speak for them, but they do use some of their own claims data. And then they have mentioned in the past a partnership with another national carrier where they combine some data to look at more national types of COE. So, Oregon plus their other areas outside of Oregon. But I think one of the things, that when you're using a claims basis for making these determinations, obviously you want to have enough critical mass of that data to make sure that it's credible. And so that's why, sometimes when you use just one carrier's data set, you only get a piece of the picture. We'll talk in a couple of minutes about the approach that we recommended for this particular project. But I guess the point here is that there's no perfect answer into a good housekeeping seal of approval in this particular area, though there's a few. And what we'll talk when we get there is that at this point, of the methods that are available, Quantros is pretty significant, and then we're proposing 2 other sort of backup methods that we'll talk about.
So once we have a program in place, we're going to want to be able to measure across all carriers that we do business with on a consistent basis so we can evaluate, whether they're meeting standards that we've agreed on. Are we able to come up with a set of standards that we will be able to use?
Yeah, that's
a softball, Jenny, so.
That's okay. Why don't we sorry, Dr. Torro, we might come back to the slide 10. Why don't we just go to slide 11? So we talk a little bit about the methodology. I'll just put it up there while So to answer your question, is there a way to have a common set of metrics oh, sorry, slide 12. Yeah. Is there a common way? And so the methodology that we think that Quantros uses is very solid because it has a very large data set, except maybe in the instance of Kaiser, where the data set is a little bit smaller. Plus, they also have a pretty robust risk adjustment method, which is very is usually something that providers really want to see. So if you just take complications, a pure complication rate, and you don't risk adjust for it, the facilities who handle the more complicated procedures just by nature, because they happen, that's their specialty, you know, they're going to have a higher rate. So you have to risk adjust for those kinds of things. So Quantros does that. And so they have a really nice method. I'll just say Quantros use CMS data for their data set. So, you know, they're getting a good picture of what's happening here, but they're not feeding in the all payer, all claims database. What we are working with, so, you know, and Margaret's helping with to lead this piece, is we've had a couple of discussions with Oregon's all payer, all claims database to get file feeds of claims of actual, you know, all the Oregonians, right? And then the proposed idea is to use the Quantros, is to have the Quantros methodology applied to the Oregon claims. So, and some provider is always going to have feedback. I'll just say it that on any quality methodology that we come up with. But if we have Quantros, we have the facility, the data provided specifically from the facilities on all their procedures, and we have the all payer, all claims database. I feel like collectively we'll have a pretty good sense of who's doing a good job. And it's not just based on these quality, on the complication rate, the readmission. There's a whole host of other questions that were asked in this data request around, do you have to Tom's point, do you have those systems and care in place to help support that surgeon? So it's a combination of the facility and the surgeon and their support. I mean, are they accredited? Do they have, I mean, Dr. Torro could probably give you more of the details about those questions about, you know, having, you know, blood banks and all the things that you need to have to make sure that you're taking care of folks the right way for these procedures.
How so I mean we're getting a little closer to the details now as far as what does quality mean. So two questions. First, earlier on, like one of the first slides where we were talking about percentiles and like best and this and that and cost, how did you come up with those? Did you use one of those estimates? Was that like Quantros?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Good to know. And then my next question is related to data. You know, part of what we're trying to set up here around the centers of excellence is, so one of the measurements outcomes that we want is low complication rates. That seems to me, I mean, it's easy for me to say, but that feels a little more straightforward, you know, as far as probably isn't, but I'm just going to say that and leave it there. The other part, though, is on the front end, where they're like diverting people into other care that is more appropriate. And that's part of being excellent, is that you don't, you're not a carpenter with a hammer, so every problem has one solution. How would that be? How would we possibly, you know, detect that kind of full system integration kind of work as part of the center of excellence? Or are we considering, or are we just kind of not part of our plan?
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Torro.
Yeah, I can say a few words on that. So traditionally, when you have certain conditions, they might be more amenable to, say, a period of physical therapy or alternative non-surgical care prior to surgery. On the other hand, there are some conditions where, if someone doesn't have any, cartilage in their knee, and then bone-on-bone pain is not going to get better by physical therapy, right? So you want to make sure that people who should have surgery quickly have access to it and do get that surgery. On the other hand, you can essentially require certain staging and care prior to surgery, or else have to explain, why it's needed more quickly. And you can look at that through the claims and sort of see that kind of care, or you can put it through a medical policy and make sure that it's the care is given appropriately prior to any surgery.
Another example is the issue around pre-operative interventions. So complications occur hugely if people are smokers for orthopedic surgeries. They don't heal as well. So one of the requirements would be, do you operate on people who have smoked in the last 6 weeks? A lot of high quality entities that limit the complications have that as part of their criteria. Another one is BMI. When people are significantly overweight and have knee replacement surgery, they have much higher complication rates. Right. So the intervention for someone who has, and sadly, being overweight is associated with osteoarthritis, particularly in the knee. So a high quality place would say, well, look at you are too heavy at this point to have a knee replacement. You need to do the things it takes to lose weight to get down to a place where having the knee replacement results in a better outcome, lower complications. Now, how do you do? I don't know how you monitor that. And Jenny, it'd be great to see whether or not any of the quality metrics that you have start looking at some of those. But I think those are probably the two most important ones. And then obviously, if you have an underlying medical condition, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, that you have those brought under control and stabilized before you move forward with any type of surgery.
And I would add that the ASCs keep track of that data of which patients are coming through, and I think one of the reasons ASCs often have higher quality ratings is because the surgeons are very selective about who they will operate on at the ASC. Those higher risk members that you're talking about, they will almost always get guided likely to the hospital if there's morbid obesity or smoking.
Yeah, and they probably shouldn't have an elective surgery. That's the other part. So it's this issue of you can risk adjust. Jenny, you can risk adjust having all these terrible situations. The question is, should you have had the surgery at the beginning? And the answer probably is no. You should get those under control before you get to a point where you're having these elective surgeries.
And just to continue on that line of thought, it's a lot easier, I would think, to have a conversation with a member right when they're starting to have claims related to pain, or conversations with their primary care physician about that, versus when they've already had a pre-op consultation with the surgeon, right? And then either the carrier, and so because in this case we're kind of leaning on those responsibilities to the carrier versus the surgeon to pre-select them out. To kind of do that via prior authorization is not always seen as the most member-friendly way to go about it.
But as we get into, as we have our carriers working towards building centers of excellence, because they're the ones that are going to be developing the relationship. We're going to be hopefully help defining the criteria and what these things look like. But those are the types of things that we're going to have to insist are included, because you're not going to get down to the lower complication rates until you do some patient selection that is of critical importance.
Well, I think we're going to have to keep pressing on. We may have to circle back, but let's try and get as much of this report done as we can.
Okay. I'll just spend a minute on this slide and kind of backtrack and just say that, again, in the approach to quality, we did start with volume numbers, which is which of the facilities met some of our minimum volume thresholds, and that kind of was gathered through the all payer, all claims database. Then we came up with those metrics, and then we worked with the carriers to refine those metrics. At that point, then the carriers were asked to go and request the specific quality data directly from facilities, and then evaluate that, and then use that information to inform what network they wanted to put together. And one nuance that I just wanted to make sure to call out was that if there was a particular facility that multiple carriers wanted to include in their network or approach for consideration, rather than having each carrier send the same data request to that facility, they all agreed that one carrier would be sort of nominated to collect the information and then share that information with the other carriers. So in that way, they sort of picked and chose who they were going to ask, who was going to approach which facilities. And I think that gives us some background about quality. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Real quickly, before we get into the carrier proposals, we wanted to show you, just as a basis of reference, where are these procedures being performed now? And obviously this changes from year to year, but in general, we kind of saw the same players at the top of the list when we looked over a couple of different time periods. So as I mentioned before, in the most recent plan years, looked like OEBB and PEBB had about 1,400 of these either joint replacements or back, spine, neck surgeries. And they were performed at 53 hospitals, either inpatient or outpatient, and 40 different ambulatory surgery centers. When we looked specific, pretty much centered around Oregon, Southern Washington, and into Idaho. And so you can see here the breakdown. We'll kind of refer to this a little bit later. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to go through.
So all of those numbers were for PEBB and OEBB members only?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So do you also have the list of just like the number that they did total on human beings?
Not in this presentation, but yes, from
you also have that.
We have that from the two places. One is from the all payer, all claims database. So that's going to be Oregon focused. It's not really going to capture facilities outside of Oregon. And then again, the facilities, when we did when the carriers sent out the data requests, there were volume numbers there so that we could confirm the number of total procedures they had done. And we didn't necessarily ask the carriers to provide their own lists of the number of procedures performed within their book of business at these places, but certainly I think that could be another data point.
Okay. Do you anticipate that would shift the list? Because ultimately what we want, it's a little beside the point that they were PEBB and OEBB people. It's just that how many did they do? Like how much experience do the facilities have in general in a year?
No, you're exactly right. I think the purpose of showing the previous slide was when we get to the point where we start looking at proposed networks, it's kind of helpful to go, where are people now versus where would they need to go in this future new world, which we don't have a perfect, I'll just give you the headline is we don't have a perfect picture of that today, but we have some hints.
Okay.
So we did ask carriers to put together a sort of formal proposal, or maybe a pre-renewal proposal, if you will, on what their Center of Excellence network would look like, because we were, marching towards this meeting to be able to provide you with some meaningful information. So we asked them to provide by the end of October, what is, the proposed network. Please provide sort of the business case for why you selected those facilities and surgeons. So that's the quality data and some of the other supporting infrastructure to support those facilities and surgeons. We asked a number of questions about the carriers. What services are you going to provide to, number one, support those facilities, and also to drive the, or to find the early identification of members, to provide that member triage support to conservative therapy. And virtual physical therapy now is usually a pretty predominant part of a Center of Excellence, because there's some vendors or solutions out there that have really honed in some nice physical therapy. Like in-person physical therapy is fine, but sometimes it's helpful to have another option for folks to meet with a physical therapist virtually. And then some of the more advanced solutions even have sort of electrodes that you put on your muscles and tracking to make sure that you're doing the physical therapy and doing it the right way and getting real-time feedback. Because the key to physical therapy is actually doing it. And that sometimes just doesn't happen. But anyway, so we asked some questions about that. And then what are they doing to support health equity or reduce health disparities in this particular proposal? And then finally, we did ask some questions about, have you figured out the reimbursement yet? So this is our high level executive summary of the responses, if you will. So Kaiser, essentially Kaiser has told us and demonstrated really that the way that their model is set up really is a Center of Excellence model. So what that means is they've already designated a couple of their facilities. Just sort of as JJ was pointing out, I mean, it's similar at Kaiser. If you need to have a joint replacement, you are pretty much going to be sent to the West Side Hospital. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. And all of their processes are sort of set up to drive folks to those more efficient places, start with either the inpatient hospital or an ambulatory surgery center or outpatient facility. And they do have all of the other pieces there to sort of monitor we'll get into more details as we go through, but it's essentially their headline is they're doing many of the things already that are Center of Excellence like, but it's just within their own system. If we move to Moda, so Moda did provide a preliminary network, but we didn't get quality data for all of the facilities and hospitals. We did get some quality data on a few facilities and a few surgeons related to those facilities, but not for the whole proposed network. What they told us is that they're still in the process of gathering that information, and just the facilities, asked for more time. So we'll get that in the next month or two. And it was, it's helpful to start to see some of the quality information and response being provided, but I think ideally it would be helpful for Moda to have the whole picture of all of the quality metrics for everyone before deciding which ones are in the network. And they agree, and that's the process they're doing. And we'll talk a bit more about these other things. There are some perhaps opportunities for areas in the support services and member navigation, and then the reimbursement for both, I'll just say for both Moda and Kaiser was, we'd like to focus on getting the network identified first, and then focusing on improving the reimbursement structure. Providence has some did not provide here. So essentially they told us that they also needed, they didn't really just provide us with a list. They just said, we still need more time to gather this quality data, because that should inform the hospitals and facilities and surgeons that we propose to be in the network. Now, I guess late breaking news, we did get some information from the Providence team last night, but our team hasn't had a chance to kind of look at that. But it looks like they proposed some facilities and surgeons, and I honestly didn't check to see what whether the quality information was fully provided. But we do have calls set up with both Moda and Providence later this week to continue the discussion. And similar responses on the support. So we'll get into some details on that on the following slides about that.
And to our previous discussion, not to belabor it further, but when we're talking about the proposed network, these preliminary proposed networks, are we also asking them for costs?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just take a little bit of a deeper dive into each.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I did the thing that I always criticize people for doing. I meant price, not cost. Price.
Yes, reimbursement.
Thank you.
Well, we did ask. Yeah, at this point, I mean, the answer from everybody you can see here is, so Kaiser said the way we've got it is the way we're proposing.
Yeah.
And Moda and Providence essentially. The question was specifically, you know, have you talked with the facility and, you know, come to some sort of an agreement about a bundled payment arrangement, which has traditionally been our focus. And at this point, you know, the responses mainly were that's coming. But we'll continue to talk with them.
Hello.
About the importance.
Okay.
Of
that. All right, thank you. Oh, Jeff, you're on.
With a reminder call for Jeff.
Yes.
We can hear you, Jeff.
All right, thanks. Yeah, okay, that sounds good. That you're in conversation with them about that. I look forward to it.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So just a little bit more information from Kaiser. As I mentioned, for total joint replacements, they tend to send people to Westside Hospital in Hillsborough. And then for spine and neck procedures, those go to Sunnyside Hospital or Sunnybrook. In Portland, maybe somebody on Teams. Okay, and then they do contract with Salem Hospital, but use their own Kaiser surgeons. They did provide facility data on complications, infections, revisions, and then they maintain a nice registry of procedures to help them continually monitor quality and outcomes. We did talk with them specifically last week about their process for monitoring quality. And I think actually it would be helpful at some point to have them provide a little bit more information about their process, because I think there are many features of it that are really quite good. They did not provide specific quality data for the surgeons. That just is a business decision that they have made. Although I think, you know, at some point, I think it would be helpful to have that information, again, just to provide peace of mind and confirmation of members, since we're doing it for everyone else.
But Jenny, again, the idea here is that if a facility or a program shows itself as high quality, that means that we're getting what we're at, and with Sean's view of, and it's at a reimbursement level that is acceptable, you've gotten where you need to be. And the idea of getting down to individual level, these complex procedures are team-based, and they oftentimes involve multiple surgeons working together. So I agree with you 100%. If you have a facility that is average or mediocre when it comes to outcomes, but if it is high quality in regards, with all the metrics that we agree, and it is, we're in a value-based payment situation that is reasonable, that's win. And again, that I'm not speaking just from Kaiser's standpoint. I think the exact same thing would be true with OHSU. I think again, where they haven't identified, I think of Providence St. Vincent's, where they have a large medical orthopedic group that does the majority or does a significant amount of their total joints. Having the results of that group, if they have high quality in that, that's win. Why focus down to the individual level where you are just so that's my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I mean, if they're getting the outcomes, if we're getting the outcomes that we've identified, and the price for that is efficient and value based, then I mean, why do we want to
made it? Yeah, you've crossed the goal line.
Right. Anyway, this is a good, I think, Kaiser has some really great stories here, and I know they'd love to talk with you more about their process. And they do have a really interesting process that they shared with us about how they do monitor individual surgeon performance and what that looks like. And so I think that would be worth hearing a little bit more about. Let's go ahead and go to Moda. Or I think Moda's next. It's alphabetical. Yeah, as I mentioned, so Moda, essentially proposed a network of 18 facilities and 14 ambulatory surgery centers, but the caveat was, hey, this is who we're thinking about and who we're going to be approaching. We don't have quality data back from all of these folks, and so we're in the process of collecting that. Once we get it, we will come back to you with a more refined proposed list, which is fair. They did provide some quality data for, as I mentioned, one hospital system and one ambulatory surgery center. And then there was some surgeon data provided along with that. In terms of support services, Moda does have a virtual physical therapy option, which is good. And they mentioned some, general member communication channels with letting people know about this particular program. And they noted a decision support tool coming in October of 2023, and then sort of pairing that with the prior auth policy. And we'll talk with Moda a little bit more about that. Ideally, you really want to have that decision support tool in place before any robust center of excellence. It may be fine to select high quality providers and do some just general communication about those facilities being better than average, but just to require the use of them without the decision support tools or a bit more of a robust early identification process may not be ideal for the member experience. I think that's kind of the highlight here. Moda does have the Moda 360 navigators, and their job is to help folks find the right place and to steer them to the most efficient, cost-effective place. Again, the thing with the Moda 360 navigator is that the member either needs to call in with some question to get hooked up with them, or they need to answer a call from Moda, who's trying to outreach to them to give them some information. So that early detection is pretty critical. Once they're starting to shop for surgeons, in our opinion, that's a bit downstream. And then we have they did propose to do some pre and post surgery surveys related to care and satisfaction, which is pretty critical in a Center of Excellence program. And then, as I mentioned, exploring the bundled payment and warranties for phase 2. Go ahead and go to Providence. As I mentioned, Providence is, in the process of collecting the facility and surgeon. They may have provided some information yesterday that we'll look at, and that may refine. That'll give us a better sense of what their network is proposed. So we should have some information for the next meeting to share with you on that. In terms of the support services and early identification, there were some really positive things that Providence said about their spine care continuum program and doing some real-time consultations with physicians at Providence Medical Group You know, that's not the whole network. So of course I guess we would suggest that they'd want a broader solution for all members who are seeking services. They do have a particular solution for virtual physical therapy. It's called Kaya. And then they have this TWISL program for pre and post-operative support, which they did provide some information on. But I would say there a lot of the responses that they provided in terms of how are you going to find members early and sort of interact with them. The responses sort of centered around care management processes and prior authorization procedures, which again, I'm just going to put that in a similar category as the response provided by Moda. So more to do on there, and I'm sure I'll hear all sorts of feedback from the areas after this meeting. They're doing a lot of great things, but I think what we see in some Center of Excellence programs, there's a bit more that we want to talk to them about. The Providence has some social service support and some nice answers around helping members who have health disparities. So that was all good. And again, mentioned the Spine Continuum program. I did not recall seeing one for the total joint program, but we'll talk with them about the post-op support on that. When we talk with them later this week. And then in terms of the reimbursement, their response was their preference is to collect the data first on who's doing the great job and better outcomes, and then structure a bundled payment to kind of get more efficiency out of the network. So that is a summary of what we received. I don't know if there are questions.
Well, I think we may be at a good place to take a short break. Does that work for you, Jenny?
That works for me.
Okay. We're a little bit behind schedule, but the discussion's been good. It's 3:15 at the moment. Let's shoot for 7 minutes. Back at 3:22.
Okay.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Cute dog.
Thank you. That's my Teddy. He's a corgi.
I was going to say, is he a corgi?
He's a corgi. Yeah.
He's a cutie.
He's my son's dog. And during the pandemic, it was, hey, we're home all the time. Why don't you, instead of why leaving him in a little apartment when you can leave him with us?
Yeah.
So he's been ours now for about 2 years.
Well, he looks like your buddy.
He is. He follows me everywhere. Okay, Ted.
All right. Well, the clock struck 22, so let's pick it up. I guess we're on page 19, right? Oh, 20.
Yeah, page 20. Okay, so these next two slides we just put together to kind of start to give you a feel for the overlay between the proposed idea and where the procedures are happening today. So on this slide, this one's on back and spine, and I think the previous one was knee and hip, but there's similar story, which is the graying, the darker gray shows you sort of the concentration of where the OEBB and PEBB procedures are being performed by county. And then the blue dots and yellow stars kind of represent, you know, a proposed network from Moda and Kaiser, assuming this would be assuming that every single one of the facilities in Moda's proposed network met all of the quality requirements or the quality thresholds that we're hoping for or that we want to see. So just what I guess the point of this one is, and spine surgeries are a little bit more varied, but is that generally it looks like places are being proposed in areas where a lot of the procedures are already happening. And so what that might mean is it may not, the travel benefit piece of it, again, it depends on whether or not all these facilities sort of make the cut. But, you know, it may mean that we don't need to necessarily consider a very robust travel benefit. Okay, and then I think the next phase, we have two more things to talk about. One is, you know, given the information that we have, you know, what are the next steps or what are some options for how we want to proceed? And then we can have a good discussion about that. And then, as I mentioned, Jesse was going to talk a little bit about some steerage options. So, you know, assuming we continue forward with, you know, coming up with a network, how do we start to think about how do we drive members to use these centers of excellence? What are some things that other employers are doing, and what's the impact of that? And I know, Jeff, you mentioned that you wanted to get some input from folks. I'm not sure at what point you want to do that, at the end or? Oh, you're on mute. Are you? I think you're on mute, Jeff.
You would be correct. Let's finish out the report and then go to a discussion.
Okay. So let's go to the next slide, Rose. So yeah, so where do we go from here? And we put together a few options, paths that the innovation work group could take. So just understanding that, you know, what we just showed you isn't a fully formed network with all of the criteria that we have ready to go to make a decision. So, you know, the innovation work group could say, this sounds really complex, and maybe we have some other priorities we want to focus on. So maybe let's just not do this center of excellence. Let's not focus on that and not move forward. So that's certainly one option. Another option is, well, we're only getting some information from some of our carrier partners, and it looks like it's going to take a little while to get it all completed. So maybe we should go back to considering a more formal procurement with a third-party COE vendor, understanding that there are some sort of pros and cons to that approach, and there may be a similar timing issue as well. And then third is, well, let's keep moving forward and adopt some incremental advancements towards our goal. And it may mean that we have a network in set up in time for the renewal. And by the way, I mean, you could actually implement a COE network off renewal. The only time you need to align that with a renewal strategy is if you set up a benefit design to steer people towards the use of those centers of excellence. And Jesse's going to talk about that in a minute. So, you know, some of it depends on how important we feel like having a benefit design tied to steerage. How important is that? So, and perhaps there could be some other options that I didn't think about or put down here, but these are the three that came to mind. Of course, we're recommending the third option, which is to maintain the course of action, but I think this would be a good time for thoughts from others.
Jenny, this is Ollie. I'm not sure that a formal procurement staff would have resources for that unless you've got other ideas of how to do it efficiently without laying all on staff.
I maybe would need to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, we'd have to talk about that one. Yeah.
And I can just give a little more anecdotal what our experience so far has been at Moda with this process. You know, obviously going along with what you said earlier, Jenny, our focus has been on quality and access. Those have been the main priorities, with the bundling coming second as a secondary goal, really. And we're still collecting quality data from as many of the facilities as we can. But one of the things we've really run into that I think is important to bring up, and it's already sort of been mentioned, is that, you know, it is a very challenging time right now to be an orthopedic or neurosurgeon, spine surgeon doing spine and major joints. They have case backlogs. They are busier than they've ever been, and their motivation to participate right now has been less than ideal. And we've heard back from at least 2 ASCs so far who have basically said their expenses are so high right now. They're concerned about their reimbursements with the added administrative burden that something like this may put on them. So right now is not the time they want to really be thinking about a program like this. Not that they wouldn't at some point, but for some of the facilities we've been working with, that's the feedback we've been getting. So just give you an idea of what's going out there in the field.
Is that because they're trying to catch up from
Absolutely.
It's post-COVID pandemic issue of both having to change methodologies and having less throughput and the same number of people needing the procedures.
Absolutely. I mean, ASCs are more flexible than hospitals. They tend to be able to find OR slots quicker than a hospital can, but they're still so backlogged right now that they're making the process more difficult for us than we would like.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, it seems like we need to go through some steps.
There's a hand up.
Ah, where is it? I don't see it.
It was.
The Dr. Soot? Is that yours?
Looks like Dr. Soot from Providence has her hand up.
Great. Please. Go ahead.
And you are on mute if you're trying
She
to
might
speak.
be stuck on mute.
Ah, there it is. Please go ahead.
She might be having audio issues. She is manning our PAQ today kind of alone. So I told her if she couldn't chime in to do so in chat. Oh, there she is.
All right. Sorry, I think I got muted, but that's okay. I'm back. I just wanted to say that I agree with Dr. Popowich, and that's really, you know, what I want to say is that our Providence colleagues and the other facilities very much want to provide high quality care in spine and joint. We have experience with bundles. We do have the spine continuum, but it's just a timing issue. When the timing came for the data, that's when we had the National Guard in all of the hospitals. All of the analytics team is scurrying, trying to get all the COVID data and the vaccination. So I don't need to go into those details. But what I would say is that we very much want to be involved and provide high quality care. It's just the timing to get the quality data was a little tough, but we got it from them last evening, so we're ready to move ahead.
Jeff, this is Tom. It seems like I haven't heard anybody say doing this is the wrong thing. The issues always are going to be around timing and when people can move forward. I would think that us trying to have it all worked out with where there'd be a benefit plan design change set by May would be viewed as forcing something. And yet we know that we can implement it anytime we want within the setting of, okay, it's a voluntary, process. So I would think that we would move forward as soon as it makes sense with our plans, with our carriers, and that once it's in place and we've gotten kind of the structure in place, we then can, as the second part, deal with the issue around benefit design changes. And whenever that works, we'd fold it into that year's planning for including it as part of the coverage issues.
I think there are some things. I agree with you that we don't force something in that's not ready to be implemented. At the same time, my personal opinion is that we keep marching on as if we were going to do it, so that we keep this front and center. There are some things that I think we need to add to the mix, and one of those is, if we're really concerned about price, we need to make some decisions on how we're going to approach it from a design standpoint, because the design is going to have an impact on who wants to participate and who doesn't, and whether or not, how much of a reduction in their price they're willing to give us. If we have no steerage, we potentially could say 200% is what we want to live with. If we have some mild steerage, we might get a small discount. If we have a mandatory steerage, then we get a larger discount. But so it's kind of we got to make a move, they got to make a move. We've got several discussions to accomplish. And any disagreement with that?
No disagreement.
None here, Jeff.
Excuse me?
Oh, I said none here, Jeff.
Oh, okay.
I think, yep, agreed.
I'm looking right at you, Sean.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we should continue to march forward. We probably do need to talk about what it looks like in order to start making some, taking some positions as far as price. In the meantime, do we have, I do understand that basically the entire medical system, hospitals, ambulatory surgery centers and pretty much any other facility you can think of is currently under pretty serious stress because of the wreckage that the Delta surge caused. And they're probably going to be working through that, at least through January, in a pretty severe way, assuming that there's not another wave. And if there is another one, then that pushes it further, right? So that being said, does anyone have eyes on, like, while we're talking about the future and future price, current prices are going up for pretty much everything. Do we have our eyes on that related to our cost driving centers, such as joint replacement surgery at this point? Like, do we have a good insight? Like, are we able to detect that as it's happening? Like, is it going up like 25% in the past 6 months or something? How would we know, I guess, in the meantime, before we get all this situated?
Well, and part of it is we know what Medicare is contemplating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, this is Patricia from Willis Towers Watson, that the COVID has really changed the dynamics and the utilization, right? I think to your point earlier that it is highly likely there's going to be future surges, and maybe not just one in the next year. So how do we, create a fair value? While at the same time knowing that, like, historical data is going to be a bit skewed for us.
Yeah, we can rerun some data, Sean. I mean, I don't see why we couldn't do that. I got an article forwarded to me today that said MSK procedures went up 143% in the last year. So probably be a good idea to rerun that data.
Yeah. I mean, particularly just to be super blunt, I mean, our first slide, we had an idea of like what the range is in Oregon, right? Of like these procedures. This one costs somewhere between this and that. And we're going to try to take a stab at, negotiating towards the bottom side. But if the entire scale is like sliding up 140%, it's kind of a different game. And so it's like, I feel like we really need to have our hands on that as we go into this. Because it's like, you don't really know what you're asking for if you don't know what's happening.
So Ollie, is that total cost spend or is that unit price?
That is actually 40%. I'm sorry. It's 143%. Deferring MSK care increased cost by 143%, but there was a 40% increase.
Yeah, I think part of it, you have to remember who had surgeries during COVID. It was people who absolutely needed them, right? Yeah. And could not defer the care. And in general, those are sicker people. Because if you're healthier, then you didn't need it. So it's partly a severity issue. Sicker people were probably having the surgeries, and they may have had more comorbidities that needed treatment at the same time. So that's why I think we'll have to, I mean, it's definitely possible. You can look at trend year over year, right? And then going back multiple years, and find a fair price today by, including data that's not just from last year or this year, but from, the prior 2 years, and work out a trend.
So yeah, I mean, yes, we can certainly take a fresh look at the price tags and how those are changing.
We might want to also get some calculations on, what's the expected cost to the plans if it's based on an incentive model? What's the impact if it's a mandatory model? I think there might be another option as well, but just so that we have some information to kind of judge how we're going from a benefit design standpoint and a rationale behind it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's easier to have, I think what we're at right now is just like, we're not necessarily ready to go to the boards and be like, here's a proposal. Right. But rather, we do need to be at a point, though, I think, where we're approaching the boards to get their temperature of where we're heading. And in order to do that, it really does need to get past the point of like the idea, and now we need to start giving them some specifics. And so, again, not as a formal proposal yet, but just sort of like this is what this could look like. Yeah. And specifically, I'm thinking about like what Jeff was saying. What could the steerage look like? Like, what's a really light touch look like? What's a kind of medium touch look like? What is a sort of mandatory thing look like? And I know that some of those really important variables are going to be missing, which is, like if it's mandatory, it kind of depends on how far I got to go, and that's missing right now because it's a chicken or the egg kind of problem. So I hear you on that one, but at least having the options sort of really clearly laid out, like it would look like this, cost sharing would look like this, travel benefit would probably look like this, just kind of so that we have something for a temperature check.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really good segue into the last slide we have. So Jesse's going to take us through the slide, just very high level. What do each of those things look like, and what kind of a result would we expect? So glad to have Jesse do this.
Yep. Get a drink of water, Jenny.
Yeah, I got to drink water. But he was really helpful in gathering all the carrier responses well, and so has been a really helpful member of the team.
Yeah, so I hope you can hear me. Okay. Good. So the steerage methods here, these are kind of a little bit interchangeable. I've experience, I think, with just about every one of these options with different clients, and many clients do a combination of them. The ordering from top to bottom is kind of lighter touch to heavy touch, and how aggressive you want to be. In some ways, the member disruption is in the same relationship, just inversely. Doesn't bother the member at all versus, open revolt potentially. But let's walk through a few of these and talk through examples. So carrier communications. So even if your carrier doesn't have a defined COE network, and I'm used to seeing these with the national carriers who have, so many facilities to look at across the country, but they usually have a defined network to start with. But in addition to that, most carriers have quality kind of metrics that can feed into their provider search. So you can go and look and see if someone's designated, accredited, et cetera, in the provider search. This is very light touch. It's just really a matter of, is it just on the website when someone goes and tries to find a doctor or surgeon or hospital, or is it something that gets pushed out to members when something is triggered, like I'm looking for a surgeon or trying to get an MRI. That's when that communication could happen. It's real low cost. I would say it's really incumbent upon the carriers, and then you agreeing with them on the communication strategy, and member disruption is almost none. It's almost negative. It's a positive, really, in the sense that you're sharing information with them that hopefully they'll find helpful. So that's the easy one. Then we start to get into things that you're going to actually have to spend some effort on. Is expert medical opinion. So this is the group for example, formerly known as Best Doctors. They've got a new name now, but these types of vendors that really are separate from, we view them as separate from the insurance carrier. So there's a little bit of arm's length, so it builds a little more credibility. No offense to the carriers, but I think that members view the insurance as just something that might reject their care. So the independence is an important factor. So popular benefit, the problem is not always highly utilized. And we note that there under cons, it can have typically a moderate impact unless you did something a little more aggressive, like made it mandatory before getting a surgery, like a musculoskeletal type surgery, requiring it. That isn't very popular, either from a prevalence with employer standpoint or with the patients themselves, of course. And then the burden of that is just finding a vendor, contracting, and then communicating it. And there can be cost. There is cost. We would say, and I think the vendors would say, that some of that cost is going to be offset by savings. They might quote an ROI or show you performance guarantees that can indicate an ROI, but there's going to be cost, especially early on, in terms of putting that in place. And then, yeah, again, member disruption, none to low, could be really seen as a positive. Just the fact that you offer that kind of benefit. So travel benefit, the third item there is this. Is an important one if you're dealing with people who have access issues, and I saw that health equity note earlier, and that's an important factor. Just kind of the populations that haven't been focused on too much in recently, and with the pandemic, it's really exacerbating those issues. So it can be a fairly simple benefit. Kind of you cap things at somewhere around $3,000 for travel for a surgery in a fly to this city and go to Cleveland Clinic was thrown out earlier. That's a popular travel benefit type COE program. And you could do this, like I was saying, you could kind of do this by itself and just kind of the soft steerage without doing a benefit design that's going to come a little later in our list. But you can do that pretty easily. And the costs, it really is a matter of the number of people you have flying somewhere, traveling somewhere, and staying overnight, and getting that surgery at a better site. And the transplants example was a good one. Often transplants are, by definition, center of excellence based, because not every facility is going to be doing those highly specialized procedures. Okay, so the next few kind of all get into the plan design, which it's starting to get a little bit more administratively burdensome. And this is where you do want to make sure that you've got your network figured out and a program that's going to at least pay for itself. Because if you're improving the benefit design for these particular facilities, that's going to create a cost to you. And I understand that some of the plans are qualified high deductible plans that would have kind of the IRS HSA challenges with them. And so it's not you can't just waive all the cost sharing. That's one of the cons in that aspect that I've got a client who's had to deal with that particular issue. And then the administrative burden there is just the complexity of communicating that to the members when they are hopefully caught early enough to explain that this is how the program works, and if you want to get the surgery at this enhanced plan design level, you're going to have to go to one of these facilities. Again, and in this one, like I just said, it's often, well, in my experience, it's been trying to get to at least cost neutral initially, and then go from there in terms of driving more savings from it. And so this is a little bit more disruptive to the members, depending on the level of plan design differential. That's the incentive to get them to go to that kind of ultra center of excellence that is beyond the in-network benefit level. I talked a little bit earlier about the HSA challenges, and that just is really, there are ways around that. It just creates a little bit more complexity from an administrative and compliance standpoint. And then the disincentive, and I think this has been discussed before and kind of on the table, is you basically push the facilities who aren't high quality into some disincentive design, almost out of network. And that's one thing I've had a client implement is if you aren't a center of excellence, your benefit level is out of network. So that is just I guess just the converse side of doing the incentive. And it's not it can be done jointly with the incentive. You kind of do a carrot and a stick, and then create kind of this compounding steerage incentive. And then the last one is the exclusive coverage through COE. And this is where very common with the transplants. And the other one I've had experience with is implementing this for bariatric surgery, where I suppose as a firm clinically, we feel that bariatric surgery should only happen at centers of excellence, a little bit like transplants. And that's very aggressive when it comes to the musculoskeletal, where people are more used to having choice. So I think there's quite a few warnings on that one, but definitely an option on the table when it comes to these programs. So any questions? Do we want to discuss this further? Do we have time?
Are there any comments or questions? I mean,
that was very well presented, and I agree with kind of the conclusions in terms of impact. The bottom line is, to me, is that if this is going to make a significant impact, we need to be looking at the bottom one. Because I'm seeing planned costs going up in number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5, and the last two, the disincentive and the COE exclusive, is where there is where you actually come to savings.
If we're saying we're doing this first for quality, it kind of seems to me that we should be comfortable with strongly discussing the bottom line.
I mean, that would be my preference. I think there's a place for exceptions, but in general, I think we should be pushing people to the place that they're going to get the best care.
Okay, roll up our sleeves a little further.
I'm an HR director. It's my job for people to hate me, so I'm cool with it.
Jeff, this is on the Jeff, for the OEBB bariatric surgeries, COEs, was there? I wasn't around then, but how much pushback was there?
It's because we added the benefit. It was excluded first, Ollie, and so then when we added the benefit, it was within these parameters. So it wasn't really a take back. It was an ad, but it was an ad that had limitations.
Gotcha.
So the big difference here is the fact that it means this would be a takeaway. The part that is hard for me to, the part that I need to understand to know how much of a takeaway or how much pushback we would get is really how big the Providence and the Moda networks would contract. The Kaiser Permanente one, we've already heard, is they're already operating with that methodology as such. So there would be no change for that percentage of our population. The issue is going to be with the Providence and Moda groups and for PEB and OEB. And, you know, if it involves, if we drop the number of facilities that can do this by 90%, it's going to be a huge impact. If we drop it 50%, it's moderate. If it's a 10% rollback, it's going to be, you know, mild pushback. So
I think it's more about distance than even numbers. Because I mean, if I have to drive to Portland and I live in Klamath Falls,
sure,
they're going to be pretty frustrated with that.
Yeah.
But if they have to drive to Medford and they live in Klamath Falls, it'd be like, yeah, it's an hour, hour and a half, big deal.
Yeah, and I agree. And yet, but the 90% is the 90% rollback is the only way that you get the people in Klamath Falls have to drive to Portland. So it really has to do, while we need to be thinking about and engaging the boards in terms of understanding where, you know, how far do we, if we really believe this, do you actually require it? The biggest issue is going to be what is the, you know, where's the how much of the contraction is there? Jenny, do you have a preliminary sense around what from Moda and Providence about, you know, are we talking 90, 50, or 10% reduction?
Well, I mean, the Moda preliminary network that they proposed is, no, there's about a 50-60% overlap. You understand there's going to be different overlap for OEB and PEB programs because they have different, you know, slightly different concentrations of people in different plans. So.
No, I'm just thinking, okay, Moda right now has 30 different facilities, both hospitals and ASCs that do knee and hip replacement. Let's say it's 30 now. What is it in their new model? Is it
facilities? It was 18 facilities. And
what was the starting point?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have, that might be in our appendix.
Well, and then it's the number of facilities where there's a drop, but also, you know, there's been, you know, 1,600 or 1,400 of these procedures in total.
Yeah.
What's given the new alignment, how many would have had to move from one place to another?
Yeah.
And so we just, that's how we're going to understand impact. But again, we're going to understand impact, you know, both from a positive and a negative standpoint. Negative because people may not want to leave their community, but positive in terms of going to places where they, you know, we are believing that they will get better care.
Tom? This is Erica, and I just wanted to provide just a little bit of context.
Yeah, thanks.
So when we originally started looking at the network, what we were really trying to do was to look and find providers and facilities that we could allow an option in every region of the state. Because as to what JJ was saying, we did feel like people would not really want to be driving to Portland, like everybody would have to drive to Portland. So that was our initial approach. And so we have sent the data request out to facilities throughout the state in those regions. And right now we're in the process of getting those responses back. Right. And then as we start getting those responses back, then we'll start evaluating the quality and who meets that quality threshold and then who doesn't. But we're looking at it from the lens of trying to provide access in every region throughout the state.
I think that's great. I mean, that would be great if we could come up with that type of approach.
I was going to suggest we invite carriers in at the next meeting for them to have an opportunity to give us their perspective and voice any concerns they have over further development of this program.
Yeah, great idea.
Does that sound okay?
Great idea.
Okay. Do we have any public comment?
No.
Just making sure you're still there, Rose. So we come to the end of our meeting, and it's adjourned.
Thank you, Jenny. Great work.
Thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.